I approached the table and paused there while my wife's jaw fell and her mouth gaped wide open. I believe it was the least appealing I had ever found her appearance. Douglas began to stand, but I gestured with my hand and said, "No, Douglas, don't stand up. While you were seated, you were secure, but if you stand, I will have no choice but to strike you, so please stay seated. I would regret causing a terrible scene here. I apologize for disrupting your time. But I must tell you, Julia, I am astounded that you pretended to be ill to avoid spending a weekend with me to be with this wretch. There is no one in the world I despise more than Douglas Simon, but to come here to our cherished spot, the place where we first met, where I proposed to you, and where we shared numerous joyful moments, is truly astonishing. Yes, it once held great significance for me, but it no longer holds that value, and neither do you. On our wedding day, you vowed never to hurt me and to never make me stop loving you. In my view, that's 2 vows broken. I'm deeply wounded, and my love for you is fading like an ice cube in a hot cup of coffee. You understand me better than anyone, Julia. You know I assess and solve problems. Seeing you here with Douglas, I realize you desire to see other men. As your husband, I cannot permit that, thus it's clear I am the issue. My solution is to step aside, so you are now free to see any man you wish. I hope he is worth it. As I started to leave, I remarked to Douglas, "This isn't over between us, however. I will be seeing you around." I briskly walked to the exit, out onto the street, sped across Michigan Avenue, and around the corner toward the lobby of the Drake Hotel. I hid there when I saw Julia dash out the door and onto the sidewalk in front of Sparga. She frantically searched for me but couldn't find me. Her shoulders drooped as she didn't see me anywhere. She hailed a taxi and traveled north towards our condo a few blocks away. I was deeply upset, but found a small comfort in having spoiled her evening with Douglas and seeing that she cared enough to try and find me at home she wouldn't. After waiting a bit longer to see Douglas' actions, he too hailed a taxi and departed in the opposite direction. I decided to stay at the Drake for a few days to contemplate my next steps. You might wonder how we reached this juncture, so let me explain. My name is John Burton, and my wife's name is Julia. After graduating from IM, I took a position as a software engineer with Grace System Solutions, a software development firm in Chicago. The owner and my boss, Greg Grace, was a respectable man. I climbed the ranks within the company rather swiftly and was quite successful. At the second company Christmas party I attended, Greg introduced me to his goddaughter, Julia, the daughter of his best friend, whom he had invited to the party. I believe he invited them specifically to set me up with Julia, and I'm glad he did. Have you ever experienced love at first sight? Well, it struck me hard. I found Julia to be the most attractive woman I had ever seen, and she was also witty, funny, and everything else I could desire in a partner. Yes, you could tell I was captivated. It didn't take long for me to capture her heart, and frankly, I think she captured mine as well. We connected instantly from the beginning and never looked back. As mentioned earlier, the party was at Sparga, which quickly became our beloved spot. 3 months later, on a Saturday night date at Sparga, I proposed, and she leapt into my arms, exclaiming yes. We got married, and our lives continued to improve. My career was thriving, her career was thriving, and we celebrated frequently at our favorite spot. We tied the knot in 2010, and everything seemed to be going splendidly until about 6 months ago when I began to feel that our initial bliss was fading. I know it's not meant to last forever, but I truly wished it would. I was almost sure nothing secretive was happening, but you can never be totally sure. It was merely a sensation that the romance was waning. I decided to act on it and started planning a surprise escape for just the 2 of us. One of my closest former roommates, Adam Hartley, who worked in the software sector with his father, Ben, was actually a client of Greg's company. I often had to visit their offices in Cleveland, so I aligned my plans with one of those trips. Julia and I were supposed to head to Cleveland to meet with Adam and Ben, and their wives, Carolyn and Gloria, for dinner on Friday evening. This was to be, followed by a short meeting on Saturday morning, after which we planned to drive to Niagara Falls for a private couple of days, returning to Chicago on Monday night. My hope was that this would help us reconnect. Julia seemed reluctant to make the trip with me. She was unaware of the Niagara Falls plan since I intended it as a romantic surprise to reignite our passion, but she resisted the idea, and I had to persuade her to agree. Friday morning came, and when I woke up, Julia wasn't in our bed. I found her in the spare room, sleeping. I whispered, "Julia, are you awake?" She moved a bit and replied, "John, I got sick during the night and left the bed so as not to disturb you. I'm really unwell and need to sleep some more. Could you call my office and inform them that I'm ill and won't be in at all today?" I did as she requested and left her to rest while I went to work. Around 10 a.m. I called to check on her, and she mentioned she was still feeling ill. I mentioned, "Well, I guess I'll have to head to Cleveland alone." Then she didn't respond, so I hung up and immediately called Adam to inform him I would be arriving solo and to check if they wanted to modify any plans. Adam proposed that since Julia couldn't join, perhaps they would skip the Cleveland trip and instead, the two couples would come to Chicago to meet with me on Friday night. Then on Saturday, they could enjoy shopping on the Magnificent Mile, and if Julia was feeling better, we could all have dinner together. I thought it was a great idea, so I confirmed I would arrange for their stay at the Drake Hotel and meet them across the street at Sparga for dinner at 6 p.m. I cancelled my flight, my hotel room in Cleveland, and all arrangements for a car and hotel at Niagara Falls. Although disappointed, I wondered, what can you do? At 3 p.m., I tried calling Julia to see if she was feeling well enough to consider joining us for dinner, but I got a busy signal. Honestly, I forgot to call again as I was preoccupied with preparing my presentation for Adam and Ben. Finally, at 5:30 p.m., as I was rushing out the door, I tried calling one last time, but there was no answer, and it went to voicemail. I left her a message detailing the plans and took a taxi to Sparga to meet with the Hartleys. We were enjoying a cocktail at our table before dinner when suddenly Adam's expression changed and he said, "John, I'm sorry, but this will greatly upset you. Juliet just walked into the restaurant and she's with another man. He's sitting behind you and to your left, against the wall." "I'm so sorry." John, I slowly turned in my chair and there she was with another man. I used the term man loosely because it was actually Douglas, whom I called Dog Simon. I despise him and always will. To make a long story short, he was once engaged to my sister Barbara and left her stranded at the altar. He appeared 2 days later at her doorstep, declaring he didn't want to marry. 3 weeks later, we saw his marriage license to another woman in the paper, and 5 months later, a birth announcement. Barbara was devastated, and although I feel she's better off without him, she has never fully recovered from the ordeal. So now you understand why I refer to him that way and why I loathe him. Back to the current moment, to say I was shocked is an understatement. I tried to speak but only stammered. I could see the shocked expressions on everyone's faces and knew they felt sympathy for me. When I managed to speak, I said, "Well, isn't that something? Clearly, I can't continue this evening with you. I can't just sit here and pretend I didn't see what we all saw. I suggest you enjoy the rest of your evening, and why don't we meet for breakfast tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. in your hotel's coffee shop. I'm quite sure I'll be in better spirits by then. Also, it's clear that Julia and I won't be joining you for dinner tomorrow night. I'm really sorry, please forgive me." I hugged the ladies and both men too, after all. They were longtime friends. I approached the table where my wife was seated. I'm fairly sure Adam followed a few steps behind, just to ensure everything would remain peaceful. It wouldn't be, but I appreciated his concern. So we are back to the confrontation at their table and so forth. I am in my room at the Drake. I had turned off my cell phone while checking in and figured I should turn it back on. There were several messages from Julia. Like anyone else in my situation, I deleted them without listening. After erasing the last voicemail, my phone rang again, but I let it go to voicemail. I didn't want to hear anything she had to say. When it beeped indicating a new voicemail, I just deleted it and turned off the phone again. Saturday morning, I met with Adam and Ben to discuss our business relationship. I said, "Well, guys, I think there are going to be some significant changes in my life and I'm not exactly sure what they will be. I'd like to ask you not to sign the new contract Greg sent. Could you give me some time to see how things settle with my marriage and my job? As you know, Greg is Julia's father's best friend and her godfather. There might be a better deal out there for you later, or if not, I certainly understand. But honestly, I see no harm in you going month to month with Greg until my future is more certain." "What do you think as one?" they replied. "John, we will do as you ask. We are with Greg because of you, and if your situation changes, we will always support you. Let us know what we need to do, and when things change, we are here for you in any way you need." I was moved to tears by their response and hugged both of them again. Then the ladies walked into the restaurant, and it was time for them to drag their husbands off to spend their money. Adam's wife Carolyn grinned and said, "Come on, dear, your credit card is cold and I think it needs warming up." Gloria, Ben's wife, added, "I hope Ben's cards are heat resistant because we're going to swipe them so much today they might just melt." We rarely get a chance to shop the Magnificent Mile. Despite how I felt, I had to chuckle because I knew they were teasing their husbands and also trying to lift my spirits. We exchanged hugs all around and they departed. I considered going to the office to organize some things but thought Greg might be there on a Saturday and Julia might show up there expecting to find me. I opted to stay away and planned to go in early Sunday morning to handle what I needed to. I spent the rest of Saturday afternoon reading a book. The next morning, I went to the office and organized a few things, outlined my plans for Monday morning, then returned to my hotel room with the Chicago Tribune and started browsing apartment ads. Knowing I couldn't stay at the Drake indefinitely, I began making plans for a more permanent solution. After identifying some possibilities, I made calls and scheduled viewings for Tuesday morning. Once everything was arranged, I settled down to watch some football. Monday morning, I visited my attorney, Roger, who had been representing me since I moved to Chicago. I asked if he would handle my divorce. He expressed disbelief, saying, "God, no, John, you can't seriously be considering divorcing Julia. You've loved her more than anyone I've ever seen." I responded, "Roger, the operative word here is loved. It's past tense now because I don't love her anymore. If you're unwilling to represent me, that's fine, but I would then ask that you don't represent Julia either." He agreed. "I'd rather not represent either of you. I think you should try to reconcile, John, but if you decide or find you cannot, then you should consult Jacob Easterman. I believe he would do a good job for you, but please try to reconcile." I thanked him for the referral but insisted, "No way are we reconciling, Roger. I just don't love her anymore." I met with Jacob, and he assured me that he could prepare all the necessary paperwork by the end of Tuesday and Julia would be served with divorce papers Wednesday morning. My next stop was the bank, where I obtained a cashier's check for half of our savings. I left all the money in our checking account intact since there were bills to pay until the divorce was finalized. Julia and I had a specific arrangement for our finances. We each contributed a fixed amount monthly to cover household operating expenses, meals, entertainment, and a separate amount to build a fund for furniture, equipment, etc. That account had grown significantly because we always contributed more than we spent. That's why I left it untouched, to cover bills until the divorce was finalized. We also each deposited about $500 monthly into a savings account for vacations and holidays. I took 50% of that account. All our other individual earnings were our own to invest or use as we wished. My investment account and Julia's were completely separate, managed by different brokers. I didn't know the value of her investments, and I presumed she didn't know mine. Likewise, our 401k plans were managed separately. The only mutual financial knowledge was the amount each deposited into our checking and savings accounts. I took my cashier's check to a different local bank and opened new accounts for myself, $25,000 in checking and $125,000 in savings. After handling a few more financial details, like insurance, I felt it was time to deal with matters at the office. As soon as I walked in, Kelly, the receptionist, informed me, "Greg wants to see you in his office right away." I figured, well, here we go. When I knocked on his door, he called out, "Come in, John," and closed the door behind you. I entered, bracing myself as he started with, "I got a call from Julia. What in the hell is going on?" I explained the entire situation to him, and he questioned, "What are you planning to do now?" To which I responded, "I'm going to divorce her." "What do you think?" I genuinely appreciate Greg, but sometimes he can be quite overbearing, and his arrogance began to show immediately. He declared, "Oh no, you aren't, John. You're going to endure this and work things out with your wife. There's no way you can divorce her and continue working here. You have two choices: reconcile with Julia or I'll have to let you go." I appeared shocked. Actually, I was feigning shock and retorted, "Greg, are you implying that my work isn't valuable enough for you to overlook my divorce from Julia? Haven't I been performing well? Have I violated any company rules or failed to adhere to company policy?" You might have guessed by now that I had my phone recording this entire conversation. "John, you do an excellent job for the company. You are as honest as they come and always adhere to the rules. Heck, you even helped draft the company policy, so I know you abide by it. But Julia is my goddaughter, and I'm telling you, unless you resolve things with her. I'm firing you. Do you understand? I knew he was just trying to pressure me, but I planned to shift the pressure back onto him. I didn't smile, though I wanted to. Instead, I said in a mournful tone with a saddened expression, "Then, Greg, you'll have to say the words because I am divorcing Julia." He seemed surprised and disappointed, but he stated, "John, you're fired." I requested that he have security escort me to my office so I could collect the few remaining items I had left. I had already removed some things on Sunday, anticipating this might happen. I knew Greg well, having worked with him for a long time. When I reached my office, or should I say, former office, there were only a few items I wanted, so I packed them in a small box I had obtained from the storage room. As I was about to leave the office, Greg pointed out, "John, what about this picture?" It was a photo of Julia and me on our wedding day. She looked stunning in her wedding gown, and I must admit, I didn't look too bad in my tuxedo either. A wave of sadness hit me for a moment, and I felt tears well up in my eyes. I said, "Oh yes, I always did love that frame." I picked up the picture, removed the back, dropped the photo into the trash bin, and placed the frame in my box of belongings. As I turned to leave, there stood Julia. She looked shocked, tears streaming down her face, clearly having seen me discard our wedding picture and sensing the finality of my actions. In a very subdued voice, she asked, "Johnny, can we talk?" I merely slowed and briefly paused my exit to reply, "There's nothing to discuss, Julia. You've already betrayed me. You broke both vows you made on our wedding day. You hurt me deeply, breaking my heart, and you did something that made me stop loving you. It's often said, you can't unbreak a heart what's left. Do you really think I can overlook your betrayal with Douglas, especially after what he did to Barb? Surely you don't believe we can still function as husband and wife?" "No, Julia, there's nothing more to discuss." I continued, walking out the door of my job and out of Julia's life. I called Adam Hartley and informed him that Julia and I were divorcing and that I had been dismissed from Grace Systems Solutions because of it. I informed him that I was developing a new system security program that would significantly outperform what Grace currently offered, but I needed a couple of months to refine it. Over the last 2 years, Greg had restricted me from programming as part of my duties, opting instead to assign me to system maintenance and customer service tasks. Consequently, I had been coding in my personal time and was close to completing the project. Had I not been terminated, I planned to propose it to Greg after demonstrating its improvements over his existing software. Now, however, I would have the opportunity to market it independently. Adam mentioned he would need to consult with his father before giving a definitive response, but he was fairly confident they would grant me a few months to finalize the software, after which they would consider implementing it based on their evaluation. I moved out of the hotel within 4 days into a rather upscale apartment. Although the rent was quite high, I had sufficient reserves to manage it for a few months. After relocating, I dedicated 10 to 12 hours daily to coding and testing. I was determined to prepare the program for market release soon and to move forward with my life. During this period, Julia was served with divorce papers. She called repeatedly, wanting to discuss our situation. I listened to all her messages, but nothing she said necessitated a conversation. She admitted that she might have slept with Douglas had I not intervened, though she claimed it never happened. Her messages varied from declarations of love to pleas for reconciliation and forgiveness. Exhausted by her continuous attempts to contact me, I asked my lawyer, Jacob, to inform Julia's attorney that I would seek a restraining order if she did not cease her efforts. Soon after, I received a message from Julia expressing her love and her desire to resolve the situation and spend her life with me. She acknowledged my potential need for a restraining order, but stated it would be her final message. She expressed profound regret for the pain she caused, reaffirming her love and leaving the door open for me to contact her whenever I wished. True to her word, I received no further messages, which, unexpectedly, added a definitive end to our relationship, even though the divorce had not yet been finalized. This conclusion, while expected, deeply saddened me. 3 weeks passed quickly as I immersed myself in my work. Then, one Friday shortly after lunch, Jacob called to inform me that a court hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday morning with Judge Janice Caldwell. He warned that this was not favorable news, as Judge Caldwell was known for her strong stance against divorce, often putting applicants through rigorous scrutiny before granting any divorce if she granted it at all. But upon arriving at the courtroom, Julia and her attorney were already present. Our case was called soon after we were seated. The court officer called for order, and we all rose as Judge Caldwell entered and took her seat. She welcomed us and then directly addressed me as the petitioner of the divorce. She inquired if I was willing to drop the divorce proceedings and work on my marriage. I responded, "No, Your Honor, I wish to proceed." Judge Caldwell, visibly displeased by my decision, then turned to Julia and asked if she agreed with the divorce or wanted to work on saving the marriage. Without hesitation, Julia replied, "Your Honor, I absolutely do not want a divorce. I love my husband and want nothing more than to save our marriage." "Mr. Burton, I have thoroughly reviewed your divorce petition and acknowledge that you are filing on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. I observe that your proposed settlement is remarkably equitable, and there is no sign of the typical spitefulness that often characterizes such filings. Do you have any explanation for this?" "Your Honor, I don't hate her. I don't wish to harm her, and I have no reason not to be fair in the settlement. I simply no longer wish to be married to her because my love for her has ended." Julia gasped at my words, and a hint of a sob escaped her. The judge then spoke. "I believe there is a real possibility for reconciliation if given the proper chance. I'm going to mandate marriage counseling with a highly qualified counselor. The schedule will include 3 joint sessions initially, followed by 3 individual sessions for each of you, and then 2 additional joint sessions. The only exception to this ruling will be if the counselor informs the court that there is no hope of salvaging this marriage. With that, she struck her gavel bam and called for the next case. I was ready to object, but Jacob gently held my arm and advised, "John, just attend the first session and see if it changes your mind. If not, make it clear to the counselor that you wish to proceed with the divorce and see how it unfolds from there." The counseling was a disaster. Julia wept, apologized, and pleaded for me to reconsider the divorce and work on our marriage. The counselor heard me out, but seemed unsympathetic to my desire to end the marriage. He asked, "John, why don't you tell me why you are so opposed to working on your marriage?" "Doctor Graham, let me share a story with you, not fiction, though it might sound like a fairy tale to many. At my company's Christmas party, I spotted a woman across the room. Ever heard of love at first sight? That was it for me. My boss introduced me to his goddaughter, Julia, and I instantly knew she was the one I wanted to spend my life with. Glancing over at Julia during the session, she was smiling, no longer the sad and tearful woman from moments ago. She was perfect for me, and it seemed I was perfect for her because it wasn't long before we were deeply involved. 3 months later, I proposed, and we never looked back. I thought we were perfect. I let out a sigh. It was nearly a sob, but didn't quite become one as I continued. It was love at first sight, Dr. Graham. I didn't grow into it. It wasn't something that developed over time. It was instantaneous. Does that give you any insight into my psychological makeup? If one can fall in love instantly, isn't it conceivable to fall out of love just as quickly? Julia was on a date with another man. She claims they never had sex, and I believe her. But there's a very good chance she would have, had I not intervened. She violated our marriage vows by simply being on that date. Adding to the betrayal, the man she was with was Douglas, whom I despise, my worst enemy. It wasn't just any man. She was fully aware of my deep-seated hatred for Douglas and how he had hurt my sister Barbara. Yet she chose him to betray me with, at the most cherished place in our relationship, the place we met, where I proposed, where we celebrated our happiest times, and where we might have celebrated future milestones like her first pregnancy. When I saw her sitting with Douglas, watched him touch her face, observed them toast each other, and saw the smile on her face, I knew the love of my life was betraying me with my worst enemy. My heart tore open, and the love I once had began to drain away. By the time I reached their table, my heart felt half empty, and by the time I walked out of the restaurant door, it was devoid of any love. All the affection I had for this woman, who had been my everything, had seeped out. So now you understand, Doctor, why I don't want to be married to her anymore. There's no love left, and I can't stay in a marriage where there is no love. I couldn't be more clear than that. Julia was openly crying by then, and although I felt sorry for her, it didn't alter my decision. I no longer loved her, and I wanted to end the marriage. I turned to her and said, "Julia, I'm sorry. I don't want to hurt you, but can't you see my point? You wouldn't want to be married to someone who doesn't love you, and I don't." Doctor: Graham then said, "Well, our time is up for today, but I think we've laid everything out clearly. I'm confident that with further individual counseling, we can make significant progress. I have high hopes that we'll be able to reconnect you two. I will recommend to the judge that these sessions continue." At this point, I was furious. After all I had just explained, it seemed inconceivable that there could be any hope for this marriage. "You must be mistaken if you think there's any chance this marriage can survive. Have your counseling sessions with Julia, if you must, but I will not be attending any more sessions." I got up and walked out of the office. 2 days later, I received a letter from the court with 3 dates scheduled for my individual counseling sessions. Needless to say, when the first date came and went without my attendance, I was escorted to the courthouse and ultimately held in contempt of court. Judge Caldwell fined me $500 and warned that if I missed my next counseling session, I would be jailed. I told her, "Then you'll have to jail me, because I'm not attending any more counseling sessions." That's exactly what happened. I skipped the next session, and 2 hours after my scheduled appointment, a police officer knocked on my door and escorted me to the Cook County Jail, a truly delightful place. My attorney visited me daily, urging me to agree to the counseling, but I refused. On the 3rd day, I had another visitor, my old boss, Greg. He was allowed a 15-minute visit during which he expressed his regrets about my situation and his previous actions. "John, I'm sorry you're going through this, and I'm sorry for how I treated you. I should have been more supportive. I think I have a way to help you if you'll give me the chance. If you agree to the individual counseling, Judge Caldwell will let you out of jail. Then you and I can discuss what I believe will help resolve your situation. All I ask is that you consider coming back to work for me afterward. No promises are necessary, just consider it." For the first time in a while, I actually felt hopeful about something. Greg had always been a friend and had been fair to me, aside from the recent issues with Julia. I agreed to his proposal and promised to think about returning to work for Grace System Solutions. The judge scheduled my first individual session for the next day, and I was escorted home by an officer who waited while I showered, shaved, and dressed for my appointment. He then took me to the session and waited until it was completed. The session was, as you might expect, filled with psychological probing and questioning. I did everything possible to be cooperative. After the session ended, Dr. Graham escorted me out and informed the officer, "Mr. Burton was very cooperative and has agreed to attend the next session, scheduled a week from today." The officer stated, "Very well then, Mr. Burton, you are free to go home. But let me caution you that if you miss next week's session, you will be taken before Judge Caldwell again, and man, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes then. She is one tough, stern woman when she's upset. So my advice is not to skip that session." I called Greg and agreed to meet with him at my apartment the following day. He and I spent the entire morning discussing his proposed plan. We made all the necessary arrangements to secure what we needed and then went out to lunch. After lunch, we sat down again to talk about my potential role with Grace System Solutions. I said, "Greg, I have always respected you and you have been a good friend, but I need to do what is best for me. I don't know if you remember, but when I received my last promotion, you told me not to engage in any programming. You said I was too valuable as a system maintenance manager and customer service relations manager to get deeply involved in programming. However, I love writing code. Greg, I've been working on a new security program that is generations ahead of anything on the market today. Trust me when I say it would revolutionize system security in this country. You're aware of the trouble retailers have had with being hacked with my new program. That would become completely impossible. I'm a couple of months away from testing on real company data, and I estimate the program will be ready to roll out in 3 or 4 months." Greg nodded. "You have Adam lined up for the test, right?" I smiled and said, "Greg, I could never really pull one over on you. Yes, they have agreed to give it a trial. You know they are with you because of my personal friendship with Adam, and truthfully, if my program is successful, they would likely leave you." Greg responded, "I know you're right, but how do you intend to get around the non-compete clause in your contract?" I replied, "The non-compete clause only applies if I quit or was fired for cause, neither of which is the case. You fired me because I wouldn't try to work out my marriage, so there's no issue with the non-compete clause." He gave a sly smile and said, "Not to be contentious because I want you back, but I could have always invented some work-related reasons to fall back on." I laughed, which seemed to irritate him a bit. "Greg," I said, I recorded our conversation when you fired me. I clearly asked you if there were any work-related reasons for my firing, and you said no, that my firing was solely about Julia and had nothing to do with my work performance. I have you on tape." "Why did you feel it necessary to record that conversation, John?" he asked. "Because, Greg, I know you. I know how much you care for Julia, and I was pretty sure you'd go to great lengths to prevent me from divorcing her." "Fair enough," he conceded. So I continued, "I expect to make a fortune on this new software, and I'm willing to share that fortune with you, Greg, under certain conditions. I will return to work for you full-time. My responsibilities can stay the same regarding customer service relations, but I will not return to system maintenance. You will need to hire a manager for that role, and that manager should report to me because it will be closely tied to the new program, assuming you get on board with it, which I believe you will be thrilled about. The remainder of my time, about 40%, will be devoted to program development. Even though I'll be employed full-time by you and paid for developing my program and future programs, the exclusive ownership of these programs will remain with me. In exchange for these terms, I will grant you an exclusive license to market my programs with a fixed royalty percentage payable to me." I understand this might seem audacious, Greg, but once you see what I'm working on, you'll be pleased with the arrangement we're going to establish. Greg, a true businessman, responded, "I agree to all the terms of this proposal. I will have our corporate attorney get in touch with you to formalize the agreement. However, you should understand that if things don't work out as expected, I reserve the right to terminate your employment. I would like you to consider increasing the royalty percentage slightly in the event that happens." My next counseling session came and went without my attendance. True to his warning, the officer knocked on my door and escorted me to the courthouse, this time in handcuffs. He smirked. "I warned you, buddy. This time you're in trouble." When Judge Caldwell entered the courtroom, she was visibly furious, her face a few shades of bright red, seemingly steaming from her nostrils, and her eyes blazing with anger. Indeed, she was upset. "Mr. Burton, it appears you have disregarded the court once again," she stated. "I find you in contempt of court and hereby sentence you to 30 days in jail." Julia was there, though I wasn't sure why. Suddenly she exclaimed, "No, Your Honor, please don't do that to John. I withdraw my objections to his request for a divorce. Please grant it, and don't send him to jail again." It seemed like she almost spat as she spoke. Judge Caldwell responded sternly, "It's too late for that, dear. He is going to jail, period." At that moment, I stood up and shouted, "Your Honor, I would like to approach the bench." She glared at me and retorted sharply, "You are not permitted to address me directly. That is what your attorney is for." I turned to Jacob and said, "Jacob Easterman, you are fired." Now, Your Honor, I will be representing myself and wish to approach the bench. I approached, and so did Julia's attorney. "What is it, Mr. Burton?" the judge inquired. "Your Honor, I would like to request a private meeting in your chambers to settle this case. I believe if we have that meeting, everything can be resolved to everyone's satisfaction." "Very well. Counselors will meet with me in my chambers in 10 minutes, she declared, calling for a short recess. The gavel banged. When we gathered in her office, I requested that the meeting be off the record. She hesitated, about to speak, when I interjected, "Your Honor, I have reasons to believe there are issues here that neither you nor Julia's attorney would want on the public record." She looked at me intently, then nodded and asked the court recorder to leave the room. "Very well, Mr. Burton, it's your show. Let's hear it," she said. "First of all, Your Honor, I have no desire to further hurt anyone involved in these proceedings. Please believe me. I have reasons to suspect judicial impropriety. I don't want your career compromised. I don't want Julia's parents' marriage destroyed. And I certainly don't want Julia to be harmed. Although I no longer love her and no longer wish to be married to her, I don't want her world to crumble. As you might have guessed, I possess evidence of an affair between you and Julia's father, which would necessitate your recusal from this case. The evidence is undeniable and quite explicit. I could present this evidence here to you and the opposing counsel if necessary, but I prefer not to escalate things. If pushed, however, I would submit it to the Judicial Review Board. Although that is something I wish to avoid, as I do not want to cause any further harm. Julia would be heartbroken, and I doubt either of our marriages would survive. I simply want to avoid causing harm. I just want my divorce. I glanced over at Julia's attorney to gauge his reaction and asked, "What do you think?" He looked at Judge Caldwell and said, "Your Honor, I've always respected you for your commitment to salvaging marriages that seemed salvageable. You've been quite strict in some cases, excuse my frankness, but I've understood your reasons. Assuming, Mr. Burton's evidence is valid, I would be disappointed in you for having an affair and further disappointed that you didn't recuse yourself from this case. However, like him, I wouldn't want you to be harmed. I believe you should grant him his divorce." Turning to me, he added, "Mr. Burton, my only request is that you sit with Julia briefly and allow her to speak with you. You've told the counselor that your heart was broken, and I recognize that hers is too. Just give her a few minutes." "Your Honor, nothing discussed here needs to leave this room. If you grant the divorce when we return to the courtroom," she granted the divorce and affirmed that the property settlement presented was fair. "We each retained our investment accounts, our 401ks, and 50% of our savings. It was agreed that the operating expense account had enough funds to cover all bills through the finalization of the divorce and beyond, and it would remain under Julia's control. It was settled that she would receive the condo and could reside there as long as she wished without cost, but should she decide to sell it, the net proceeds would be equally split." The judge reversed her ruling of 30 days in jail and instead imposed a fine of $500, which I gladly paid. I realized she needed to maintain some dignity in the situation to avoid additional scrutiny of the case, which nobody desired. As agreed, I sat with Julia in a private room adjacent to the courtroom. She apologized once more, confused about her actions, and told me she planned to continue seeing her counselor to understand her behavior. She expressed her everlasting love and pleaded for my forgiveness. "I do forgive you, Julia, and I don't harbor any hatred towards you. I simply don't love you anymore," I responded. I hugged her and left the room, hearing her sobs as I walked away. Over the next 6 weeks, I focused on finalizing the new security program, preparing for its implementation on Adam and Ben's system. A week before the scheduled visit to Cleveland, Julia called. "Johnny, I've decided to sell the condo. I have an offer for $560,000. I didn't want to sell it to someone else without giving you the chance to buy it first. If you want it, you can have it for $280,000, and I'll reject the other offer. What do you think?" "First of all," I replied, "I do not want the condo. Please proceed with the sale and have my share of the proceeds sent to my attorney, payable to me. You will handle any necessary paperwork for the sale and ensure the funds are transferred into my account. But why are you selling the condo?" She explained, "I'm selling it because I'm relocating." "I've secured a new job and won't be living here anymore," she continued, revealing that she had learned about her father and the judge, acknowledging that while I hadn't intended any harm, it still pained her when she discovered the truth. She felt she needed a fresh start. I wished her luck in her new endeavor and said my farewells. 2 weeks later, I walked into Adam and Greg's company with my security software ready for the testing phase and the upcoming implementation on their live system. When Adam came to greet me, he gave me a big hug and expressed their excitement about the new system and eagerness to get started. "John," he said, "let me introduce you to our IT administrator," and there stood Julia. I glanced at Adam and asked, "What is this all about?" He smiled and replied, "Julia is our new IT administrator. I'm sure you're aware of how skilled she is, and I'm confident you'll have no issues collaborating with her to deploy the new security package." I was slightly taken aback, but I informed him, "I will need a computer workstation to work on a few things for the remainder of the day. I'll work with Julia today, but mainly I'll be preparing the package for installation." I requested a computer with internet access. Despite the initial shock, I managed to calm myself down, and surprisingly, the day was rather enjoyable. I had always found Julia to be witty, intelligent, humorous, beautiful, and fun to be with. None of those attributes had changed. Moreover, I had always seen Julia as not only my wife and lover, but also my best friend, so we got along wonderfully throughout the day. It was quite evident that Julia was making every effort to be near me, to interact with me, and yes, even to subtly touch me. It was affecting me. As I mentioned, I had always considered Julia my best friend, and truthfully, I missed her. At 5:30 p.m. we said our goodbyes with a "see you tomorrow," and I left. Sitting in my hotel room later, I decided to make a bold move. I logged onto my laptop and accessed the company computer system. Yes, as programmers, we almost always embed a backdoor into our systems for access if needed. I retrieved Julia's address from the personnel records. Then, I went to the wine store, picked up a bottle of Julia's favorite wine, and drove to her apartment. The doorman inquired if she was expecting me. I informed him that I was there to see Julia Burton, and that she was not expecting me. He tried contacting her apartment but got no response. Assuming she might have gone out for dinner and wasn't back yet, I asked if I could wait for a while. He agreed and directed me to a small lounge area off the lobby. It wasn't long before I saw Julia enter the building with a man in tow. As they reached the elevator, the man hugged her, kissed her, and patted her on the bottom. Just then, the doorman realized something, approached them, said something to Julia, and pointed in my direction. I started walking toward them and heard Julia exclaim, "Oh God, no, please no." "Well, here we are again," I said as I approached. "It seems I'm always interrupting your dates, Julia. I apologize, I had no right to show up uninvited, but obviously I am glad I did." I handed the bottle of wine to the man and said, "You two have an enjoyable evening," as I walked out the door. Julia rushed after me, pleading, "Johnny, please don't go. Please don't leave me again," but I did. I went back to my hotel and sent an email to Julia at the company. "Julia, when I walked into Adam's offices, I was surprised to see you there. It didn't take me too long to realize that you had probably quit your job, sold the condo, moved to Cleveland, and went to work for Ben and Adam so you would have the chance to be close to me. I might be perceived as arrogant, but I assumed you wanted a chance to get close to me, hoping that we might reconnect and get back together. I suspect Greg had a lot to do with you being there, informing you about my project and where I would be. It doesn't really surprise me, though I'm not thrilled about him interfering in my life. Honestly, I was quite happy to see you today. I've missed you. We were, after all, great friends, and I enjoyed spending time with you. It felt really good, and I didn't want it to end. That's why I decided to bring over a bottle of wine, hoping we could continue our conversation away from the office." I had to pause and gather my thoughts. Then I continued. "Imagine my surprise at seeing you with another man. It confuses me. You go to all this effort to be close to me again, yet in the short time you've been in Cleveland, you've already formed an intimate relationship with someone else. There are only two explanations I can think of. Either you aren't truly interested in renewing our relationship, or you still believe you can be with me while dating other men. Either way, I'm removed from the equation. I had been second-guessing my decision to divorce you, but your actions have reassured me that I didn't make a mistake. What makes me angry at myself is realizing that I almost let myself be fooled again into believing you cared about me. You don't, you only care about yourself. I hope one day you find what satisfies you, what makes you happy. The only thing I have left to say is, don't pursue me in any way. As far as you're concerned, I shouldn't exist. Have a good life, Julia." Then I sent her a second email concerning the software installation. "Julia, attached to this email are complete instructions on how to activate the security software. You'll need a 2-word password to access the file and the security system. I'll let you figure out what those 2 words are. But if you think back to our last encounter at Sparga, it should be pretty straightforward. If you can't recall, maybe Adam can help, since he heard them too. Of course, the password is broken promises. Those 2 words will always be needed to access the security system. I know I'm being a bit petty, but I want you to be reminded of how you treated our marriage every time you log in. I've installed the package on the server. Using the instructions, you only need to activate it and set second-level access codes and passwords for various users. It's all detailed in the instructions. If you encounter any issues in the future, contact Greg and he will connect you with the team that worked with me on the program, as I will no longer be working there. Good luck." Sometimes men who divorce a cheating spouse find a new partner who is younger, more beautiful, sexier, smarter, and more loving than the one they left behind. One who adores sex will love them forever and never cheat. That was Julia before she betrayed our marriage. I haven't found that woman yet. After resigning from Grace System Solutions, I fell into a depression. Despite the huge royalties I continued to receive for the security package, which Greg marketed beyond my expectations, the money didn't matter to me. I was navigating uncharted emotional territory. My self-esteem plummeted, a first for me since I had always been confident. Eventually, I sought help and started seeing a counselor. After a few sessions, I began to recover. I continued therapy for a while longer and, feeling better, decided to just go with the flow for a while before I ever fall in love again.